Hey there, got my Fuji XH2S yesterday and I want to come out and take some shots with it and see what it looks like. So I figure I'd make a first impressions video for all of you. This is in no way, shape or form a review. This is literally first impressions. I just want to get a sense of what this camera can do in terms of the image quality, dynamic range, autofocus, and those sorts of things. So full disclaimer, I bought this camera with my own money, so no one sent this to me. This video is not sponsored, so the opinion about this camera is my own now and moving forwards. Just want to be really clear and upfront with you about that. So there's a lot of cool features about this camera, and I want to talk about those and why I bought it and why I'll be testing it and reviewing it. But first of all, if you didn't notice already from the intro and for right now, the aspect ratio is different, and that's because this camera can shoot in a 6.2K Opengate, which is a 3:2 aspect ratio, so basically reads out the whole sensor. Now, why is it interesting? Well, when you're shooting on a mirrorless camera, you know, the sensor is usually in a ratio of 3:2 for taking photos, and then when you take video, it crops the top and the bottom automatically. So this records the whole thing. So it's just cool and different, and it was really weird because I've never filmed that way, and so when I think about framing, I'm always thinking about 16:9 or 17:9, and so it's kind of weird just doing that. But what is this actually useful for besides being just cool? Well, you can reframe really easily. So you can crop into a normal UHD 16:9. You can also crop into a DCI 17:9. Or you can use this for vertical video as well, because there's a lot more vertical real estate because you're not cropping the top and the bottom off the sensor. So you can take one capture and then reframe it for lots of different things. So that's really cool. Also, it's very detailed because it has a 6.2K image, and there's some oversampling going on too. Anyways, I'm shooting this on the Viltrox 13mm f1.4. It's the only lens I bought as of right now. I heard good things about it. I wanted something wide and fast and has decent autofocus. I'm also shooting in f-log2, which is the new log curve for Fuji. They added that on with this camera in addition to their normal f-log. It's supposed to have more dynamic range. One thing that's weird is the base ISO is 1250, so it's gonna take some getting used to. A lot of ND filter going on. And so there's a couple questions I'm sure you have about this camera, so I'll get into testing this camera in depth, of course, over the next, couple weeks and months. But the biggest question you probably have is autofocus. So let's test that out real quick. All right, so this is one of my favorite spots to come. I've only been here once before, and if you remember, I was here testing out the RF 16mm lens. And anyways, I'm gonna go walk down here and take a look at some other stuff over here and talk to you more about why I'm so excited about this camera. As I said last time I was here, I was testing out the RF 16mm lens, and I thought, you know what? I need a longer lens next time I come because there's so many cool birds here. I don't know if you probably can't see them on such a wide lens, but there are tons of egrets and herons, and there's a few ducks and some other birds, which I can't identify. I'm not a birder, but yeah, I definitely need to do that. Anyways, how does this look with the backlit situation here? Just giving you that for another perspective. Also, I just want to talk about why I'm so excited about this camera. Now, first of all, the X-H2S is their flagship camera right now, and I'm just really excited about it because this is sort of the next generation of Fuji cameras with the new technology, the backside illuminated sensor, all the cool stuff that's in this camera that's really full of tech and can do some really crazy things in terms of video. Of course, as a videographer, that's really fascinating to me, and I can't wait to dive in deep into that and test it. And I'm really excited to share that with all of you because that's kind of what I do in this channel, is that I will take a deep dive into cameras, review them, test them, use them, and share my experiences with everybody so that I can inform you to make a good judgment on buying decisions, or if you're using any of these cameras, to learn them a little bit better, and through that teach videography, content creation, and filmmaking. So I'm really excited to do that. The other thing is the autofocus, which so far from what I can see is working really, really well. And I know that's always a concern with people trying to think about buying into the Fuji system because, you know, I think now Fuji is in the ballpark of Canon and Sony. I don't know if it's exactly as good, but it's definitely in the ballpark. And I'm really impressed by it, and I'm really excited about that. Now, one thing is it varies a lot depending on the lens you're using. So there's certain lenses that are better than others, so I got to figure that out. And for lens choices, as I said, I bought this Viltrox lens. I might get the 16-55 f2.8, which I've owned before. That's a really, really beautiful lens. So I'm not really sure yet, but I got to figure that out. Anyways, I got to go find some shade. It is brutal out here in the sun. All right, I found a spot in the shade. And even better, a bench in the shade. All right, this is a great place to test dynamic range. So we have a nice dark area where I'm here and then a bright area behind me. Of course, you've probably been looking at all the images so far, trying to look at the dynamic range, and I haven't seen it yet. It looks pretty good on my screen here, and it's a decent screen on this camera. But of course, I won't know till I go home and edit it and grade it. So I'll do that, and then I'll let you know what I think about the images and talk more about the physical parts of the camera. I'm gonna give you some more reasons why I'm excited about this. So I've always been intrigued with Fuji, and I did buy an X-T4 a few months back, and it didn't have very long, and I wound up selling it because I just had too many cameras at the time. And I buy all these cameras, so I can only really have so many, and I'm always buying and selling them. And I was testing out a bunch of other stuff, as you guys have seen on this channel, and so I wound up selling it. But I really did like the camera a lot. I really like the image quality. The colors are unique and are very cool, and I just enjoyed using it, but it just at the time didn't make sense. So right now I'm really excited to get into the system, and I think just opening up the box and my first impressions with the camera is that it really does feel much more video focused than other mirrorless cameras. Just the way the buttons are laid out, even the customizable buttons, just the way they came default out of the box were things I would normally set them to, like toggling face detect on and off, manual focus button, turning the level on and off on the camera. So there's a lot of really cool, just like customizable buttons, and it does feel like more like a video camera. And I think we're really gonna start seeing Fuji be a bigger player in the video world and competing with Canon and Sony a little more, especially because the autofocus, like I mentioned. But the specs in this camera are absolutely insane. You can shoot, as I already mentioned, that 6.2K Opengate, but it does an oversampled 4K, and you can shoot ProRes internally on a CF Express Type B card. You can also record ProRes RAW to a Ninja V Plus, and you can record B-RAW to a Blackmagic Assist, I think is what it's called, like their external recorder. So there's just so many cool video specs in this. It all shoots up to 4K 120. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this camera. It is an expensive camera. It's $2,500 for the body. It's their flagship camera. There's going to be a lot of comparing it to other cameras like the R7, the A7 IV, things like that. And, you know, each of these camera companies are sort of carving out a little niche for their cameras, but I know a lot of people are hesitant to buy an APS-C camera because you can buy like a full frame Sony, like the A7 IV for the same price, for $2,500. So it'll be really interesting for me, as I previously owned an A7 IV, to think about where this fits in, and that'll be part of the discussion. Anyways, enough talking. Let's go head home. I'm gonna head home, edit this all up, and I'll let you know what I think. All right, I'm back home. I just finished editing and color grading all the footage that you just saw. And overall, I am really impressed with the image quality and the dynamic range on this camera. And considering that was my first time out shooting with it, I was just really happy with the way it came out. And I know that as I get more comfortable with the camera, the image will start looking better. But anytime that you jump into a new camera system, it does take a while to get comfortable with it. You have to learn the log curves, the color science, the LUTs that you want to use, and how to manipulate the footage to get what you're looking for. So I first want to talk on F-Log2 in my experience grading it. So I did own the X-T4 for a little while, but I didn't get a ton of experience grading F-Log. So there are 4 LUTs that you can download for free from Fuji. I'll leave that link down below if you want to check those out. And I did play with all of them and decided to use one of them, and I want to talk about them a little bit. So the first one converts F-Log2 into Eterna Bleach Bypass, which is one of the picture profiles that's in this camera. The second one converts it into Eterna, and the third one into YDR. But what I wound up using is the fourth one, and that's because I like to color grade everything myself, but I want to make sure it's technically in the right space first. Now, if you're shooting F-Log2 in F-Gamut, it's in the BT 2020 color space. So that bottom LUT is like a real technical LUT that just converts it into Rec 709. So I use that and graded it by hand. That's just what I like to do unless I can find a LUT that I really like. But generally speaking, I do grade things by hand, and I was really happy with the way it came out. And I did really enjoy the oversampled image. So you have of course, that really cool 6.2K Opengate, but the 4K modes, which was the second half of the vlog where I was shooting, was in UHD. So that was all in 16:9, and that's an oversampled image. And I personally prefer oversampled images when I can get them. They give you a lot more detail and sharpness. You can always soften the image with a diffusion filter or in post, but I like to have that extra detail. And if you need to, you can always punch it a little bit too, and probably no one's gonna notice. So really happy with that. In terms of the colors, I did really like them, but what I was noticing, there was a strong magenta shift in like the midtones and highlights, which I did my best to correct. I'm not sure where it's coming from. It could be from the camera, the lens, or my variable ND filter. I used the Nisi True Color variable ND filter, and I compared this with some other well-known ND filters, and I made a video, which I'll leave linked down below. But this is pretty neutral, so I'm not really sure where that's coming from. Definitely have to experiment a little bit more. Now, I want to talk about exposure because I struggled with this at first, and the reason for that is that on Canon and Sony, which I shoot on all the time, I use the histogram to judge exposure. And this, let me show you, the histogram is really, really bad. So that's the histogram, that little gray box there. It's almost impossible to see. And so there is a workaround. I set one of my custom buttons here to open up the RGB histogram here, which you can't see anything right now because it's just pointed. There's a lens cap on it, but this is a lot bigger and easier to see, but it takes up such a large amount of real estate on the screen that it's pretty much impossible to leave on all the time. So I would check it and then turn it back off. Now, another thing that's hard about this camera is that, you know, I'm used to shooting on Canon and Sony in C-Log2, C-Log3, S-Log3, where the base ISOs are 640 and 800. The base ISO on this camera is 1250, which is really high. So I was having a tendency to overexpose, and I couldn't really see the highlights clipping on the histogram, so I was blowing out some highlights. So just my knowledge about what aperture and, you know, with the ND filter that I had on there, you know, I was getting better exposure and then using that other histogram. I really don't like to use the meter that's on the camera, the number, like the number of stops, because it's not like, it's just an average or some way to figure out, you know, what the camera's guessing the exposure, so I'd rather use a histogram. You can use zebras too. I don't like to use that for that sort of application. I'm gonna experiment more with that, but one thing I have to keep in mind is with that higher base ISO, I'm gonna need to use a lot more ND, so probably gonna be using a 6:9 filter, stop filter in the future. Now let's talk about the build quality and my first impressions of the physical features on this camera. First of all, I actually really like the build of this camera, and the main reason is that it has a really deep grip, which is fantastic. And I know that this is an APS-C sensor in this camera, but it still feels like a big camera, which I actually love, especially as a videographer. It's nice to have a big grip, lots of buttons, makes it really easy to use the camera. So let me show you around the camera a little bit and give you my opinion about what's going on here. So first of all, top down, you probably see that it doesn't have the traditional dials that you see in a lot of Fuji cameras like on the X-T4. Personally, I prefer this style because I didn't use those buttons when I had an X-T4. I know for a lot of Fuji users, they prefer the old school dials. For me personally, as I said, personal choice, I'd rather have this setup here. You have the mode dial here with 7 custom settings, which is a lot, and you can set each one to either photo or video, so you have a lot of different options there. Also, you have a really nice on-off switch with the shutter button and a record button. On top here, like I was saying earlier, a lot of these buttons are set up that are already great the way they're set up. So ISO, white balance, this custom button was set out of the box to toggling face detect or face eye detect for autofocus on and off, which I love having a button for that. That's great. You have this screen here, which I don't think is, you know, I'm personally going to be super interested in, but you can customize this too, and you can make it white on black or black on white, and you just have whatever you want on here. I have all my settings. Again, I don't think I'll be using it very much. Also on the top here, which is really neat, this toggles between LCD and the EVF, and then this one will change the color of the screen there. So just a lot of buttons on here. And onto the back, we have, as I said, like a pretty standard screen. It works all right, and we have lots of customizable buttons here. I didn't have to change very much. And one thing that's really neat, as I said, this is very focused for videography, is that you can actually use a 48th of a second for shutter speed. So yeah, it's really cool. If you're shooting 24p, you can get 1/48 instead of 1/50. So those kinds of things. And onto the other things on the back here, there is an optional fan that you can get for this. In this shoot today, I didn't have any overheating issues, but if you're running 4K 120 for extended time, they're out in the heat, they do sell a fan that screws on the back here. I don't like how these are just like, they look like something should be in them. That's where the fan screws into, and then this is the connection for the power. So that's on the back here. All right, so onto this side, we have a CF Express Type B card, which you need for shooting ProRes. I think everything else you can shoot on the SD card, which is what I've been using. I may or may not get a CF Express Type B card, not sure. If you are looking for one, Angelbird makes a really affordable one, which I'll leave linked down below. And I use these ProGrade V90 cards for everything because they work on all my cameras. But that Angelbird card is actually cheaper for twice as much memory. So if you're looking for a CF Express card, it's a great option. As I said, link down below. Over here, we have pretty much the ports that you want. We have the USB, headphone, and mic. And look at this, full-size HDMI port. Really happy to see that. As you guys know, that's one thing I really would like to see on a lot of cameras, especially Canon. You listening, Canon? Onto the bottom here, we have the battery that's out of the X-T4. The battery life is great. I didn't even use a half a battery on that whole vlog, so I had another one with me, but no real problem there. And then onto the front, we have a couple more buttons. We have this button here set up for switching between autofocus and manual focus, and this one here toggles the horizon level on the screen, but they're customizable. One thing which I've complained about in other cameras is that this doesn't have a third exposure dial, so we have like shutter in the front, aperture in the back, and then we don't have that wheel, which I like to have 3, but it doesn't have that. So again, to change ISO, you press the ISO button and then you can change it. So again, it's one of those things where I don't change the ISO so much, especially when I'm shooting outside, but I would love to see a third dial. Other than that, build quality, as I said, it does have a nice deep grip, which I love. I find that the material on the actual camera is not my favorite. I do prefer the grip on some of the Canon cameras or the FX3. It's just a little bit grippier. This feels a little bit smoother, and I don't really like the flappy doors and stuff. They're just kind of annoying and in the way, but that's what we get out of this. So overall, I'm not really into the finish on this so much, but I do like the way the camera looks, and I definitely like the way it feels in your hand with that nice big grip. Well, without going on too much longer, that wraps up my first impressions of the Fuji XH2S. This is not a review. As I said, I just got this camera yesterday. But as I said earlier on in the video, I am really impressed with the image quality, the dynamic range, and the autofocus, and makes me really excited for the potential of not just the XH2S, but in future releases from Fuji. I think they're really going the right direction for videographers, and I'm really excited to see where that goes. I'll be making a bunch of videos testing and reviewing the camera on different features and capabilities, and just using the camera on a regular basis and sharing those in videos for all of you to check out. So if you're interested in that kind of content, please consider hitting subscribe down below. It'd be greatly appreciated. Let me know if you have any questions about the XH2S, or if you have a Fuji camera or you're looking to pick up an XH2S, let me know that down below also. Again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.